Welcome to the final video of Part 11 on the regulatory challenges of sustainable finance. We've covered supervision. Now we reach the most sensitive institution of all, monetary policy, the core work of a central bank. The European Central Bank has begun greening its monetary operations, tilting its corporate bond purchases toward greener issuers, and reviewing its collateral rules to account for climate risk. What's the rationale? Two things. First, climate risk affects price stability, the central bank's primary mandate, because climate shocks can disrupt the economy and prices. And second, it affects the central bank's own balance sheet, which, as we saw, is materially exposed through its bond holdings. So on this view, considering climate is simply prudent central banking. But this is where the criticism gets fierce. Critics warn of mission creep, that an unelected independent central bank, by favoring green bonds, is straying into politics, effectively picking winners and losers in the economy. And that's dangerous because central bank independence rests on a narrow, technical mandate. The moment a central bank looks like it's pursuing a political agenda, that independence is threatened. So the question that hangs over all of this is sharp and genuinely hard. Where does legitimate risk management end? And where does industrial policy, deciding which industries thrive, begin? There's no clean line, and that's exactly the problem. That tension has now cracked wide open into a full transatlantic split, one of the most consequential developments in the whole field. In simple terms, Europe is tightening climate supervision, while the United States is retreating. And the retreat has been dramatic. In January 2025, the United States Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and the United States Treasury all withdrew from the NGFS, the very network of central banks that had built the global climate scenario framework we studied. The world's most important central bank walked out of the club, and the Securities and Exchange Commission's climate disclosure rule has been scaled back and tied up in litigation. So climate financial regulation is now deeply politicized and, crucially, geographically divided. What was, just a few years ago, a globally coordinated project, everyone building the same frameworks together, has fractured along the Atlantic. Europe presses on. America pulls back. For a global bank or investor, this is a real headache. They now face two diverging rulebooks, two philosophies, two political climates, and it raises a genuine question about whether a globally coherent approach to climate risk is even still possible. Let's confront the core question directly and fairly present both sides, because this is one where reasonable expert people genuinely disagree. The case for central banks acting on climate. Climate is a genuine source of financial and price stability risk, and both of those sit squarely within a central bank's existing mandate. Ignoring a real risk to stability would itself be a failure of the mandate. The case against it risks mission creep, politicization, and overstepping what should be a narrow, technical mandate. Dragging an independent institution into contested political territory it has no democratic legitimacy to enter. Now here's the framing that I find most useful for cutting through the noise, the dividing line. Managing risk is broadly accepted. Almost everyone agrees a central bank should understand and guard against climate risk to the system, just as it guards against any other risk. Allocating credit is contested, deliberately steering money toward green and away from brown. That's where critics say the central bank crosses from risk manager into policymaker. So the honest answer to should central banks do climate is it depends what you mean by do climate. Measure and manage the risk? Widely accepted. Actively reallocate capital? Deeply contested. And tellingly, where any given institution draws that line increasingly depends on which side of the Atlantic it sits, which tells you this is now as much a political question as a technical one. So where is all this heading? Let me offer 4 threads. First, climate risk is now firmly embedded in supervision. That battle is essentially won. Supervisors everywhere accept it as a risk. But the capital treatment, whether climate should change how much capital banks hold, remains unsettled and probably will for years. Second, disclosure is consolidating globally around the ISSB baseline. Even as the European Union baseline, even as the European Union simplifies its own rules and the United States retreats, a messy convergence, but convergence nonetheless. Third, the next frontiers are already visible. Nature and biodiversity risk, captured by a new framework called the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And adaptation finance, funding resilience to the warming we can no longer avoid. Climate was just the beginning. Nature is next. And fourth, the deepest point of all, the architecture now exists. The scenarios, the stress tests, the disclosure standards, the supervisory expectations, they've all been built. The open question is no longer whether the tools exist, but how hard regulators will actually use them. And that, as this chapter has shown, is now a political choice as much as a technical one. Let me draw this chapter together with 5 takeaways. 1. Climate is a genuine financial stability risk through both physical and transition channels. And the tragedy of the horizon explains why supervisors must act despite short horizons. 2. Supervisors measure it with NGFS scenarios and climate stress tests, but these remain exploratory and severely data constrained. 3. The framework treats climate as a risk driver within the existing Basel and ECB rules, while the debate over green and brown capital factors stays unresolved, with strong arguments that a carbon tax is the better tool. 4. Disclosure is consolidating from the TCFD to the global ISSB baseline, alongside the European Union's broader double materiality approach. And 5. The field is now deeply politicized. The European Union simplifies its rules while the United States retreats, exiting the NGFS in 2025. If you take one sentence from this chapter, make it this: the machinery to manage climate as a systemic risk has been built, but whether it gets used and how hard is now a question of political will, not technical capacity. This slide and the next collect the sources, and they're a superb reading list for anyone drawn to the intersection of climate and financial stability. The academic and official literature includes Carney's foundational Tragedy of the Horizon speech, the Green Swan book from the Bank for International Settlements by Bolton and co-authors, Battiston and colleagues on the climate stress test of the financial system, Jung, Engler and Berner on CRISC, Uemke and Opp on green capital requirements, the ECB's economy-wide climate stress test, and Greenwood, Landia and Thesmar on vulnerable banks and fire sales. Several of these would make outstanding thesis topics, as these topics are quickly evolving and the discussion is highly dynamic, requiring much more research. And the final slide gathers the policy, standards, and data. The NGFS climate scenarios, the climate stress tests from the ECB, the Bank of England, and the Federal Reserve, the Basel Committee's principles for managing climate risk, the TCFD and the ISSB standards, plus the European Union's CSRD and taxonomy, the European Commission's 2025 Omnibus Simplification Package, and the Federal Reserve and United States Treasury withdrawals from the NGFS. That brings us to the end of Part 11, the chapter where climate meets the guardians of financial stability, and where finance meets raw politics. In our final chapter, we come back down to Earth, and to the individual human being, with microfinance, microinsurance, and the quest for financial inclusion. Thank you for watching, and see you there.